Tiq Milan really only has to say a few words, and the kindness, sincerity, and wisdom that he carries with him in everything he does and presents to the world just oozes through. You will learn so much today, as I did, from this fantastic conversation with an amazing human. Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Tiq Milan, who I have followed on social media for some time. I've heard your voice from place to place, but today you're speaking with me. I'm very excited about that. Please tell the listeners who you are and about the members of your family as it is.
Sure. So I'm Tiq Milan. I'm from New York. I've been an advocate in the trans community for better part of about 20 years now in various capacities, from youth work to media consulting and media advocacy. And now I do a lot of leadership development work and also a lot of work in the theological space. I preach at my church, and I travel, the country and sometimes internationally, just sharing my story of what it's been like to be a Black trans man and to be a Black trans man whose story is really rooted in love. I think oftentimes we talk about trans people and the idea is we've arrived here through hell and high water. We had to be resilient and we had to, fight so hard for people to love us. It's not necessarily my story. My parents were very, very supportive. My family's been very supportive. It was really kind of my trans story has been a love story. So that's been really inspiring to so many people. And I've been really blessed to be able to share that. And again, I do leadership and development in the corporate space as well, just trying to teach bosses and managers how to be better bosses and managers and how to be inclusive and create inclusive systems and inclusive modes of communication. So that's kind of the rundown of who I am. Now, as far as when it comes to my family, I am an ex-husband and I'm also a father. I was married in 2014 to a Canadian, to a
There you
Canadian,
go.
lived in Toronto for a little bit. We had a daughter. And now my daughter's not in my life anymore. Unfortunately, after the divorce, my ex-wife started to feel differently about her queerness
Mhm.
and kind of got kind of turfy on me. And I fought really hard to have a place with my daughter. I went to court in Toronto for custody, and then she left Toronto and moved to Dallas, Texas, of all places, and then had to go to court in Dallas. And that was really, really hard. Dehumanizing was terrible.
Mhm.
And yeah, so now my daughter's not in my life anymore, but I still, am her father and I still love her. And she's 7. And
Mm.
last time saw her last year, but I haven't had a real relationship with her in a while. So
That's a
yeah.
lot. That's wow. That's a whole bunch of things to unpack. So
Yeah.
so you were married to a Canadian and you
Yes.
had your daughter in Canada?
In Canada. Yeah, in Toronto.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, yay, Canadian fertility
Yeah.
systems for
Yeah.
for
It was so
supporting you.
great too. It was
Oh,
really
good.
good. It was a really, really good experience. It really
Excellent.
was. Yeah, it was a really good experience.
Now, for listeners who aren't aware, in Canada, when there are two parents having a child together, regardless of the genetic composition and sexual identities of the people who are the parents of the child, they both go on the birth certificate and they are both therefore deemed to be the parents of the child. We don't typically don't hear of people doing a second parent or step parent adoption because it's not necessary to legitimize our family creation here in Canada, which is not the same south of the border.
Right.
So then the marriage dissolves, and you
Mhm.
said you went to court in Canada.
Mhm.
How did that play out? Was the fact that you were on the birth certificate and the legal parent of the child recognized here in Canada?
Yeah, that wasn't even a question. Wasn't even a question. I'm on the birth certificate. My daughter's Soleil Milan. I'm Tiq Milan. This is my child. We were married when she was conceived. Canada was like, "You're the dad."
Yeah.
So I did there was no problems with that. And the part of the reason why I didn't do the adoption is because we had planned on having a life in Toronto. We were going to stay in Toronto and make a life there. But
Right.
what happened is I ended up getting a job offer in New York, back home in New York City. Right. So I've
Right.
lived in New York City for 22 years. But when I got married, we moved to Canada when Trump took office the first time.
Yep.
Trump
As you
took
do.
office the first time.
Out
And
you
my
go.
ex-wife was like, your country's crazy. We are
Yeah.
leaving. So we left. So we left and said, we're going to make our life here. So I didn't have to do the adoption. Then I got the job offer and she was like, you have to take it. And then the marriage dissolved. So it was all of these things happening at once. And then, yeah, but to answer your question, Toronto courts were great. Um, they started to see, what was happening. They were starting to see how my ex-wife was being kind of manipulative, and they were seeing like, there was a lot. It was just so dramatic. But I will say that the Toronto courts were really transparent about it, and they were fair to me the entire time.
That's amazing.
They were.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And people need to hear those kinds of success stories as well because it's terrifying. I mean, we enter into however, even cishet people who have babies
Yeah.
think at some point on some level they think, oh, well, what if something happens and we're not still together? I mean, we
Mhm.
all worry about that and should like what is that going to look like down the road? And we hear horror stories from other people about what they've been through. So to hear
Yeah.
a positive story that the court recognized the dynamics of the situation and
Mhm.
treated you with dignity and respect is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and I think if she hadn't moved to the United States and had stayed in Canada, because I was like, if she was going to stay there, I was going to try to shift my life so I could be with my daughter. I think it would have been totally different because really the Toronto courts they weren't playing those games with her. They were like, you're not going to do that to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. But then
Yeah.
she ended up in Dallas, Texas.
So that was a mystery. I never could get. I never could get a straight answer as to why Dallas, of all places, So I was in New York City. I'm like, you're so close. And I was coming back and forth a lot from Toronto to New York to see Soleil, and I was supporting her in various ways. So anyway, so she decided to go to Tal. I said, okay, fine. You want to be warmer, whatever kind of BS reason you gave me. So she moves to Dallas, and we had an amicable relationship for a minute, just for a little bit while she was in Dallas. And then it really started to blow up. Because like when we were in court in Toronto, it got to the point where Toronto courts was like, does this woman need a psychiatric evaluation? Like, we're not going to like it was just so outlandish the
Mhm.
lengths she was going through. And I think that at that moment in Toronto courts is when she was having her like literally like a come to Jesus moment. She had joined this conservative church out there.
Mm.
And I think that started to happen in Toronto. But she was like, I'm gonna extend this olive branch. I'm not going to fight with you. We're gonna do this co-parenting thing. I'm moving to Dallas. And I'm like, okay, we'll
Mhm.
co-parent. And you're gonna go to Dallas and we'll do it. But then when we got to Dallas, she's just slowly started to pull my daughter away from me. And then it all just kind of just went to shit, you know.
And you've been through the court system in Dallas as well, and
Yes.
that did not go in your favor.
That did it not. I can't say that it didn't go in my. It was just like humiliating, you know.
Yeah.
There was at one point when the judge looked at the face, she said, because see, here's the thing, when we went into court, we didn't say that I was trans. All of my paperwork, everything, I transitioned 20 years ago, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. You're a man. I mean, full
Right,
stop.
right. So that's my lawyer saying. He was like, we don't even have like laws to even speak to trans a man like you. So you're just a guy on paper. So I'm like, great. But here comes my ex-wife. Was like, he's trans. And my ex-wife went and found the donor
Okay.
and was like, this is what it's supposed to be. So right. So he's in play now too, right? And
Right.
so now we're in Dallas, and the way that they're presenting it is like, look at this cisgender heterosexual couple with this child, and this crazy trans person is trying to encroach on this marriage, on this union. And so they're like, well, you were married to him. Well, like he forced me, and I was in a bad like
Yeah.
this really just wild.
Yeah.
It's just so crazy how like the person you marry is not the person that you divorce. Like she's just such a total stranger,
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
the guise of like spirituality and Jesus and all of these things. So when we got to Dallas court, they're like trans. I remember the judge looked at the picture. She said transgender. What? Like she didn't even like it didn't compute
Yeah.
because their idea of trans is never a man,
No.
and it never and it you're right. It's not a person who is assumed to be a cis person because how I look, nobody knows I'm trans unless I tell them.
Right, right.
She couldn't. So it was like we had to explain to her who I was. And then I had to explain to her, I had to like explain why I was this child's father and why I was here. Like she couldn't understand it. And she kept saying, well, go take it back to Toronto court. And my lawyer's like, they can't. It was already ruled in Toronto court. We can't, it's already done. We can't take it
Mhm.
back to Toronto. The judgment has been set. And the thing is, there's this a legal kind of agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico, where it's like if whatever ruling you have here goes here. So the ruling that we had in Toronto was supposed to be honored in Dallas, but they could not understand it. And they were like, how they wrote this ruling doesn't work here because the laws are different. You know what I'm saying? So it just,
Yeah, yeah.
I had to like go through the whole thing all over again to prove that I was her father, to prove that I wasn't this terrible person. Like, it was just crazy. It was really, really hard. And it got to the point where I just kind of just had to just step away, because the courts had made it so hard and I had this thousands and thousands, like almost $70,000
Hmm.
in legal fees,
Yep.
like I wanted to buy a house for me and my daughter. Now I got to start all over, whatever. Start over, you got to start over,
Sure.
But it was also just kind of like the spiritual and emotional toll that it started to take on me. And then my ex-wife would let my daughter call me Mr. Teak.
Oh, instead of dad.
And yeah, and then she would get on the phone and my daughter would say things like, I don't love you and I want all my toys back. Because I had a bunch of her. She stayed in my house for a month where we were like, okay, she came stay with me. So I had a whole bunch of stuff in my house for Soleil. And she would like literally put a little child on the phone and make her break up with her father.
Yeah.
So this is what I had to go through. And so I just kind of had to. So again, you asked it to work in my favor. It got to the point where they're like, listen, she's the mother and you have this ruling. We can't force her to do anything.
Right.
They just kind of were just like, they didn't care. It was a lot.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, and to be fair and have full transparency, you and I have spoken before, and so I do understand a little bit outside of what has necessarily verbatim been said so far. But my understanding from you before was you got to a point where you, as the parent in this situation, decided you had to act in your daughter's best interest because it was clear that her mother was not. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And, I'm not gonna say I think, my ex-wife, I don't think that she's a bad mother. Like my
Right.
daughter's like smart and she's taken care of and she's fed and I believe that
Fair.
she's safe.
Yeah.
But the length that but I'm a good father. You know me, my daughter had a really close relationship. You
Yeah.
took me away from her.
Right.
It's less about you taking her from me. You took me from her.
Right.
And you were actively doing that and actively, it felt like she was manipulating a little girl to really hate me,
Right.
and so I stepped in as much as I could, but what was happening was, you putting her on the phone and having her say these really awful things to me, and I could see like the confusion in my daughter's face.
Hmm.
I was like, I'm a big boy, I can take it. But
Right.
like what you're doing to her, so maybe you know what, I'm just gonna, you don't want me around that bad. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna go ahead and walk away so that you don't do this to her.
Right. Well, and I think that that's more what I meant. I guess when I say that she wasn't acting in your daughter's best interest necessarily wasn't so much that she wasn't meeting her basic needs and it wasn't maybe even being a fantastic mother, but
Right.
it's not in your daughter's best interest to have one parent pitted against the other in front
No.
of you. And you're supposed to be trying to figure out how you fit in this whole world, let
Mhm.
alone how you fit in the dynamics of your family. That's
Yeah.
just not something
Yeah.
that a child should have to do.
It wasn't fair to me or to Soleil. It wasn't fair to
Right.
either one of us. And it got to the point, and I'll be honest, it got to the point where, when we had, the courts only gave me two 15-minute calls a week. That was all the calls they gave me. The 10 to 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And usually they'd only be like 5 minutes,
Right.
because Kim would hang up, whatever, she would just hang up or whatever. But um, yeah, so to only get these little bit of calls, and what would happen is I would start to get anxious,
Mhm.
every time I was because I was like, what kind of hurtful thing are they gonna say to me? Is my daughter gonna hang up in my face? So I almost got to a point where I was resenting it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that feels really bad. That felt really, really bad. And it
Yeah.
was full transparency, like walking away from it, it was almost a weight was lifted off of me
Hmm.
because it was just so emotionally hard, so spiritually
Absolutely.
hard. I was like, I can't. I'm like, you're trying to break me.
Yeah.
Can't- I
Yeah.
just I have to walk away. But I'm a very spiritual person. I do believe that God doesn't make any mistakes, and I pray for my daughter all the time. And and I do believe that one day we will be reunited. I do things like this. I'll always say her name. I like try to leave a little digital footprint
Yeah. Yeah.
so she can find her way back to me if and when she can. And
Yeah.
that's all I can do. And until then, just be the best person I can and be in a place in my life where if she needs me, she has a safe space with me. That's all I can do now.
100%. And you're right. That's all you can do. And you're limited with, I mean, you can't go and knock on the door and say, "Can I take you out for lunch?" One, you live in different cities, and two, that's just not what the court system allows. And so you do what little pieces that you can to preserve your hope and your dream of the
Yeah,
reality that will come, that you will be
yeah,
reconnected with her.
yeah, yeah. That's all I can do.
That's all you
You know,
can do.
and it's like, as a father, I think oftentimes people treat particularly fathers, like particularly fathers, or maybe also, and I can't speak to this for as far as like, um, same gender couples. If it's also a difference between the person who gave birth and the person who didn't,
Right.
maybe you can speak to that. But I know, as a father, sometimes people treat us as if we're like a secondary parent, and sometimes you can start to internalize that. But like you're saying, I can't just go up to her and say, "Can I take you out for lunch?" Actually, I can. I can because I'm her father and I'm on the
Right.
birth certificate. Like I absolutely could just show up and say, I'm taking my daughter to lunch.
Right.
And I have every right to do that. Right. But it's like at what cost?
Right.
Because I've thought about that. I could be aggressive, but like she's mine. She's mine. She has my name. I'm on the birth certificate. Legally, I have that right.
Yeah.
But it's like, at what cost? So I just wanted to, and I just wanted to name that because I've had to work through that. Yeah,
Sure.
but it's different with me because I was just constantly getting these messages that I wasn't valid as a father, but I also have to keep telling myself that I absolutely am, or I'm a secondary parent when I'm not. I'm just as much a parent as she is. If I could have been, we would have been, equally yoked in that way. Just
Yeah.
wanted to, yeah,
No, but valid. And you raise an important point. You're right. A lot of times dads are seen as being secondary parents. And I think, and in speaking with, excuse me, gay men who, as a gay couple, have had a child through adoption or surrogacy, they they come up against the same type of thinking from the world as a whole, thinking, how
hmm
can two men who are raising a child be adequate parents to, like,
right,
those poor kids? And they meet it all the time, even from people who are perfectly comfortable, fully happy with, even from same-sex female couples who look at them
yeah.
and say, "But you didn't give birth to that kid, so can you really, as a man, can you really know?"
Yeah, and that just and all of that that's really like internalized sexism. This
100%.
infantilizing men around things. This as a man, as an adult, you should be able to take care of yourself and raise a child because you're an adult, right?
Right.
So it's infantilizing of men, and also it's a sexist thing to say, like a sexist trope that women are the only ones who can nurture, or the only ones who are supposed to take on that kind of labor, and then also like that cis heteronormativity around thinking that just because you don't share a bloodline with someone that they're not your real family, that you would not die for them, that you can't be like your soul connected to this person. Like that's a bunch of mess. There's that saying that says blood is thicker than water.
Yes.
But the whole saying is that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, which means that the
Oh.
promises that we make between each other,
Hmm.
right, means more than whomever I share a name with. If we don't have those same kind of those promises and that same type of respect. So it's about that covenant that we create with each other, right? So I think it's important for us to like to have these discussions, be able to like queer our thinking around families and around love and around
Yeah,
like connection.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I have met so many incredible people through the work that I do over the years. And and honestly, to spend 10 minutes with any one of them tells you that there isn't a there that sexism is just so inappropriately placed, because a parent who truly loves their child is a parent who truly loves their child. It doesn't matter what's in their pants. It
Period.
doesn't matter how they
That's
identify. It
it.
doesn't matter what markers on their driver's license. It
Doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter.
Nope. None of that matters. None of that matters, right? And that's why I think for us as like queer and LGBTQ people, I always say like we're the people of the future.
Hmm.
like being able to understand that and be able to expand our notions of love and family is to create a better blueprint for all of us, you
Yeah.
know? And that's why I really do love like being a part of this community. And a part of frustration about not having my daughter is that she doesn't get this. You
Right.
know, I think people have it so twisted where they think, kids who are brought up with queer parents, or in community that they're doing a disservice, but I think it serves them so well.
Oh, sure.
I think it serves them so well. I came out at 14. I'm 45. So the vast majority of my life has
Sure.
been in queer community. And I've learned just so much about like understanding the person that's in front of you, understanding like the variety and the beauty of like gender
Yeah.
and sexuality. Some of the best lessons I've learned about masculinity have come from butch lesbians. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the softest kindness I've gotten is from like feminine men and trans women. Like it's just been such a beautiful, beautiful blessing to be a part of this community, And so yeah, and even though it can be hard, I'm here for it. And I think that, yeah, again, I think that we offer something brighter, something better.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about your family of origin and
Mhm.
how you grew up with them being supportive and welcoming and kind to you
Yeah.
and that's got to also have formed a huge part of now who you are and how you see the world and everything else, and it made it possible for you to feel like you could come out at 14.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think, having a loving, supportive parents and family was vital. If I didn't have that, I don't know if I'd be able to be here. I don't know if I would have made it through like losing my daughter if I didn't have a support system of if I didn't already have family
Right.
who loved me. But yeah, my parents were cool with it. It wasn't like, when I came out at 14 to my mom, like she just freaked out a little bit, but she got over it. She
Yes.
got over it real quick.
Yeah.
When I came out as trans, everybody was like, it was like the talk of the film, like, oh, Teak is a boy now. What do we do? What is going on?
That's
You know,
right.
what's happening in New York City? Why is she like this? Like, it's just crazy for me.
Yes.
But they
Yes.
all got on board. After a while, they all got on board. And it really hasn't been a big deal. But I think a part of the reason why it's been easier for me and why I had such a loving, open family, honestly, even though I'm like a Christian and I go to church every Sunday, I didn't necessarily grow up in a really religious household. My
Right.
mother was pretty agnostic. She was like, I could take it or leave it. You don't never have to go to church if you want to. Like my
Right.
dad is like a spiritual man. Like he's like the universe and he's like kind of like a little hippie kind of guy.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't grow up with that. So I think that because we didn't have that religiosity, particularly that a lot of like Black American households can have, like, and I came from Black American middle class. My mom was a nurse, my father a mechanic, very that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
we weren't like church people all like that. And I think that that created space,
Sure.
created a lot of space.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll be right back. You know about babyREADY because you're listening to this podcast, so you know that we are all about queer family planning and helping you have the family of your dreams. But did you know that we don't abandon you once your baby arrives? We actually offer parenting coaching as well, and that's not just for the newborn phase, although we are there for that, but it's through toddlerhood and young children, tweens, and even through the teen years. When you need someone unbiased to lend an ear so that they can hear where your struggles truly are and help you come up with a path and a plan that feels truly right for you and your individual family, don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to be there for you. Visit us at www.babyready.info for more information.
So what happened through all this journey of life that you've been on that then had you embrace religion to the extent that you have now?
Yeah. Well, growing up, like I said, my father is a real spiritual guy. Like he reads the Bible, but he also reads the Quran and the Dead Sea Scrolls and poetry. So growing up, he would do that with me.
Right.
So he always had a real spiritual connection, but it wasn't necessarily a Christian connection.
Right.
you know.
Okay.
So they always had a really firm belief in God. But my mother, I told you, she was like, that's you and your dad for
Yeah.
that spiritual stuff.
Yeah. You do
My
you.
mother was like, logic. She's like, I don't want that. So my dad really like ingrained that in me to have a really strong connection to God. So it was always there, you
Right.
know. And I got introduced to Middle Church in New York City. And it's a really inclusive, really beautiful church. And I got introduced to them and I walked in there and there was all kinds of people just of all different races and ages and sexualities. And I remember they had a queer men's club and they had a sermon that was dedicated to like the divinity of queer people. And I was like, what is this place? You know?
Yeah.
I really fell in love with that church, but I think what really brought me like to Christ was I really hit a rock bottom. And I'll be honest, I've had, addiction issues throughout my life.
Mhm.
And it got to the point where I was going through all that with my daughter. I kind of really hit a rock bottom. And I was like, I was suicidal, basically.
Yeah.
It's really bad. And so, it was just like one of those like literally come to Jesus moments. It was really like I'm about to get out of here, and it was just like God said to me, like I'm not done with you. So you gotta give something up. And so I gave it all up and got baptized in the church, and have been a part of it ever since. And it's really just changed my life. So it was kind of like hitting that rock bottom, but knowing that I had a strong connection to
Yeah.
a higher power.
Right.
But middle church just gave me like a really clear loving path towards that I really needed at that moment.
Sure.
So
I mean, it's fascinating to me. So one of the things, and I've said to my wife on more than one occasion, we don't go to church. She's probably more spiritual than I am. I'm probably a little bit more like your mom. But one of the
mhm.
things that I did have always love about attending services and things like that was the ritual, it was the community, was the music and the
Yeah.
like all of that. Just I would say that if I was to miss anything about going to a service, that would be the kind of thing that I miss. I don't necessarily miss the sermons and things
The
like that.
Jesus part of it.
Yeah, the Jesus part of it was like meh, but the other stuff was, but it is so powerful, and that community is, and the
Yes.
community connection
Mhm.
is is fundamental, and I think many of us crave that.
Yeah. And it's so powerful to have a spiritual home that is also so queer, inclusive. And you're right, there are people who
Sure.
come to my church who are just who are agnostic, who are, atheists, who are people who are Jewish, and they come for the community. They come for the inclusion, for that just that ritual and that being able to be in a congregation of people who love you not despite who you are, but because of who you are, like everything that
Yeah.
you are. And you
Yeah.
could do that in the name of your spirituality. It's not a lot of places that you can do that. And I really do believe, as a spiritual person, I do believe that queer and trans people do have a very particular spiritual place on this earth. That two-spirited people and trans and queer people in history, like before colonization, there's historical evidence that queer and trans people were very, very important when it came to religious ceremonies and spiritual practices throughout, the world, throughout
Yeah.
Africa, throughout Turtle Island and what's known as the Americas. So there is something that's in us,
Yeah.
like that is just ancient to our history. That is our spirituality is strong, is really, really strong. So I don't know. I know. I really try to tap into it.
What you say though is very poignant. And I think that it's something that we forget. In the constant barrage of criticism and questioning and pushing ourselves forward against the tide, I think that we forget that we are accomplishing great things
Hmm.
because of who we are, and that we are persevering in spite. It would be so much easier for all of us to stay the sex that we were assigned at birth,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
to partner with someone of the opposite sex, to
Hmm.
to just live that life.
Yeah.
And yet that would leave us with a void. And so we
Yeah.
don't choose the easy path. We choose the path that feels right. And yet we fight every step of the way. And in so doing, for some people, just touch on the lives of a few people and maybe make them think just a little bit. And
Yeah.
others touch on many people. Like you reach many, many people, and encourage them to just push their
Hmm.
thought processes a little bit wider. And I think
Yeah.
that I think that that's what we're here to do
Yeah,
on many levels.
I do. I agree. I think all of us as LGBTQ people, we've said that we're going to live for ourselves. So I'm not going to be who you think I'm supposed to be, right? I'm going to be the person that is tethered to my spirit. I'm going to be defined by what is the most valuable to me, not by these external things. This
Mhm.
is something that we do, and we do it. We do it knowing that we may lose everybody that we thought loved us, knowing that we could be ostracized, knowing that we could be physically harmed. But it's like I am going to manifest what is dearest to my spirit, and this is my queerness, and this is how I love, and this is how I look, and people see it. And you're right, just us living is a model of possibility.
Mhm. Mhm.
Somebody needs to see me. Somebody needs to see you.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to see that and to let them know that they can live. To let them know
Yeah.
that they can be their most best self because they saw me, because they saw you, because they saw us.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important. It really, really is important.
Absolutely. It's important. And I think, truthfully, it's important now more than ever in the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
We see swinging pendulums all over the place, and the queer community, especially the trans community. And I mean, one part that I really struggle with is that there's so many members of the queer community who take the T out of LGBTQIA plus, and I don't understand because we wouldn't be here if we weren't all a community together.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. But right now, the spotlight and the weapons and everything is more targeted towards the trans community than it is any other part of 2S LGBTQIA plus.
Yeah.
But we all need to stand together, and
Yeah.
we need to raise our voices as high as we can to support one another. How do we, in your opinion, both with your lived experience, your professional experience, your religious theologic perspectives,
Yeah.
how do we navigate the waters we're swimming in these days?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Loaded as it is.
It's a good question. Because oh my gosh, it's so much going on right now. I think the way we navigate this time is we really have to start. You have to start where you are, use what you can, and do what you use what you have and do what you can. Right. So it's about starting within our inner circles.
Yeah.
I think within our communities, in our neighborhoods, thinking about like mutual aid, talking to like minds, thinking about I think the efforts are going to have to be more localized and more community based.
Mhm.
Right. And less about trying to convince, like you said, there are people within queer community who want to take the T out of LGBT.
Yeah.
Those are not people. I'm not talking to them.
Yeah.
The stakes are too high for any
Yeah.
of us to waste any of our energy or our resources on people who think like that. And people who think like that, honestly, I think are a loud minority, right? So
Sure.
I mean, I mean, I could be wrong, but
In my
and maybe
experience, that's true.
living in New York City and now living in Los Angeles is kind of a different kind of thing. And also, I'm not in a lot of like white gay spaces, so I can see how that because this idea of taking the T out, like transphobia, racism, sexism, they're all woven into each other. So when you're going to find one, you will probably find the other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So those are not necessarily my people. I don't
Right.
have to talk to them. It's about talking to us and how we can build from the inside. So that's really what is happening, particularly here in the United States, where we see in real time the dismantling of the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
Federal
Mm-hmm.
bureaucracy I mean, the Department of Education gone.
Yeah.
Housing gone.
Yeah.
IRS be gone. So, we can't necessarily depend on these systems to help us like navigate these really, really choppy waters right now.
Yeah.
I'm on the board for the New York City LGBT Center. And these are the conversations that we're having. Like if we just signed on to a lawsuit with a bunch of other organizations because the federal funding is chopping our funding. What's going to happen to our programs? What's going to happen to our people? So so that's what we're trying to do as an organization. Like, how do we really start internally and then work our way out? So that's what we have to do if we're talking about what the concerted effort is going to look like, like if we're going to be organizing. And if you're not a person who's going to be organizing, again, talking to your family, the people in your house, taking care of each other, making sure you're doing your research, taking care of your family, taking care of your friends. Right now, we have to go into our little bubbles and start doing what we can in a really, really intentional way. That is the only way we're going to get through this is if we just look at each other. That's
Yeah.
it. We
Yeah.
look at each other, we got to take care of each other.
That's all you can do,
That's
really,
all we
isn't
can
it?
do. That's all we can do. These systems do not have our back. And I've worked with lots of LGBT organizations here in the US. Um, who have a lot of pull, a lot of money. And what's frustrating is we've been doing so much work and how the hell did we end up here? All this work, millions and
Yeah.
millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So what does that tell me? We have to do something different. And I love the center, and I love GLAD, and I love Lambda, I love all in HRC. Okay, but we got to do something different
Yeah.
because we're here now, despite everything that we've worked for.
Yeah. And I guess then that leads me now to thinking, respecting your religious approach to things and your theology and your and because a lot of the claims are that it's rooted in religion. That's what we have heard. That's what the queer
Yeah,
community has heard for
yeah.
a long time. And
Mhm.
so is there a way to marry, like is there a way to go knocking on the doors of community who maybe, like, how do you find the ones that may be open to learning, continuing to learn, because
Mhm.
maybe that
You
will
mean in the
help
queer community, or you mean like the
even
straights?
outside the all of the queer community, but queer community,
Yeah.
trans community, like how do we knock on the doors of that feels so slammed shut on us, especially
Mhm.
because of the of a religious perspective, and I don't even necessarily, maybe I don't even know what I'm asking, but if so much of the negativity is rooted, it's rooted in individuals, but powerful individuals who use religion
Yeah.
as their argument, and then you get the people who don't have a lot, who don't have a lot of money, who don't necessarily have a lot of formal education, who don't know where to look to
Yeah.
find the answers. How do you get in their door and
Yeah.
meet them where they are to educate
Yeah.
them?
Well, I think first the messaging has to shift before you think about how to distribute the message. First, the message, and this was I always say, particularly when it comes to religion, and for me to be a Black queer man who is a Christian, I always say this: white people do not own Jesus, okay, and
Mm-mm.
conservatives do not own Christianity. And what we are seeing right now, this is a white nationalist push, right? And white nationalists and nationalists and fascists have always used religion as kind of their foothold into authoritarianism and power. Right. What they're using is this fear mongering, and they're calling it religion, and it's not. And I understand because listen, Christians can do a lot. Okay. Sometimes we're like, y'all are so embarrassing. Y'all are so embarrassing right now. Like, I'm sorry, that's not what it's supposed to be like. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think just shifting the message, like this is not what it is, and this is not what we're saying as queer Christians. What I think what we know and believe in is a Jesus of loving kindness, and the Jesus who was a protester. We're talking about, a little brown boy who was born to a teenage mother out of wedlock. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Who was with the destitute, who was with the sick, who was with the sex workers, who was with, what I'm saying? If anything, that person would have been on this side. So it's being able to try to switch the narrative, like when we come to this religious
Right.
context, but it's really hard because we're talking about generations of trauma, of religious trauma that a lot of queer people have, and I don't know if
Right.
I could come in and fix that. And the thing is, and I was having this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. It's really not on me I'm not trying to convert anybody.
No,
You know what I'm
no.
saying? But you know what I'm saying? But I do want people to know that you do have a place here. Like you do
Right.
have a place. You don't have to be here, but you
Yeah.
do have a place here if you really want to understand like the loving part of like the Christian doctrine. When you want to know like the loving, like really complicated, beautiful parts of who Christ is and what that looks like, there is a place for you as a queer person.
Mhm.
Um, but if not, that's okay too. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think like the messaging has to shift, and then how trying to distribute it, it's really hard because again, there's generations of like religious trauma, particularly on queer people who've been told that they're going to go to hell and that God hates them and that they're the devil. Like that's some really
Yeah.
heavy stuff to hear your whole life. And then have someone tell you Jesus loves you. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get out of here.
I'm not feeling the love.
Like I'm not feeling that at all. And I understand it. I get that. So I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the hard part is right now is feeling not desolate in this, and feeling like there is still hope, because it can feel so overwhelming,
Mhm.
and to just, as you say, use what you have and do what you can, and just that
Mhm.
find those small pockets, and do your reach from there within your localized community,
Yeah.
and do your reach from
Yeah.
there.
And sometimes be intentional about like just turning it off. Like I was on Instagram the other day and I was like, this is awful. It was just so much. Sometimes, that self-care looks like taking a break from that and going just into your interest, into your inner circle, the people who you love the most, who love you the most, and just talk to them and have some joy and figure out what each other needs. Sometimes I think that's right now, that's what we need because, the messaging is it's just so heavy. It's just so hard. It feels, and I'll be honest, it does feel like hopeless in some ways. It's like, what are we even supposed to do?
Yeah.
Have to do something different. And what's different is working inside first and then working out like this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very true. I feel like I could sit and learn from you all day. The way you put things together, the way you formulate your sentences, the way that you show your passion just through the tone of the voice that you use makes the words that you share very accessible, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I love that feedback. Thank you very much.
I am going to let you go and get on with your day. You are a few hours behind me here, and so your day is just starting where I'm midday here. But it's been a while since you've had the time to be a hands-on parent to Soleil. But what
Yeah.
I ask all the parents who are on my show to tell me is what is their very favorite part of parenting. So when Soleil was with you more, you had the time to spend with her. What was your very favorite part of being her dad?
Oh, that's such a good question. God, there were so many good moments. Just it was being able to watch her little personality grow. I do wonder about how she is now, but just her just a little adventurous spirit.
Yeah.
She'd get on her scooter, put her helmet that had this mohawk on it. And she wanted to wear two mismatched shoes, and and she's going really fast. She's like, "Oh, watch how fast I can go!" Just that adventurous spirit, and like little things. I used to love to watch her eat.
Yeah.
I would cut up some like rice and beans and some avocado, and she would just
Yeah.
smack in and chomp in. So yeah, I remember those little things, those little her growth, you know.
Yes.
That was I love the part. I love that. And even when it was exhausting, even I mean she stayed with me for a summer, well not for the summer, for a month. Summer of 22 was the last extended time I had with her. And it was just me and her. I was exhausted. My house was a mess, and she was a mess. There's just shit everywhere. And I
Yeah.
said, damn, I really love it. I
Yeah.
really just love the chaos of raising another human being. It is really a blessed experience when it's something that you want.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
chaos, the growth, and the chomping.
And I have to truly believe in my soul that you gave her the foundation that she needs so that she will feel that place in her heart that she's ready to reconnect with your soul because you are a piece of her. And that will come. It'll probably be some time before she's allowed to sort of let it come, but it will come.
Yeah, yeah. I hope so. I appreciate that. I know I think so. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
just let it go and just, be the best again, be the best I can so that when she does reach back out, I have a place for her.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really
Thank you. This
appreciate
was
it.
great. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
As a queer individual with colonial lineage, I want to first acknowledge the land upon which I live and work. Being from what is now known as Burlington, Ontario, I recognize the original ancestry of these lands as they span from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment and beyond. These lands are steeped in Indigenous history that benefits my community every day. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I stand is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land dictates everything about our ways of being. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. Concepts of the binary system and heteropatriarchy were imposed by the colonials who were, at the same time, removing children from their homes, families, and all that was familiar to them. These same children were divided by the only two prescribed binaries recognized by the settlers, and they were forced to conform to a performative, gendered falsehood. The land doesn't operate under binary thinking. It is diverse, complex, and unpredictable at times. Rather, the land holds us and all of our remarkable paths and identities. Every organism and spirit has a purpose. It is from this understanding that I strive to live and grow. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming Baby Ready podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.